Yes, people, I hope you're doing good. Before we get into the video, I just want to let you know that all my sample packs are available via the link in the bio. Use code YouTube20 for 20% off everything. Welcome back to the channel. Today we've got a bit of a special video. We're joined by Wait For Me, and he's
What's up?
gonna sort of go through a little bit about himself, his inspirations, and then a bit of like a tutorial about the way he makes his drums and maybe some other stuff. But yeah, we'll sort of get into that a little bit later
Yeah.
on. So do you want to introduce yourself first and just tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my artist name is Wait For Me. And my real name is Kirk. And I'm from the East Coast, northeast coast of the US. I live in the southeast coast now. I live in South Carolina, where there's not a lot of this music, but it's slowly kind of growing. But anyways, a little bit like about my story. I've been producing for a really long time. Probably like picked up my first copy of Ableton maybe like 8 or 9 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. But with my production, I've only really kind of taken it seriously over the last like 3 or 4 years. So when I first got everything, I was just kind of tinkering around and messing with things. But so I got into electronic music production and making dance music. First off, when I started listening to like a lot of new disco from like 8 or 10 years ago, there was just a lot of that new disco, that kind of like summertime type of house music going on, and there was a lot of different like music blogs or something like that. So I kind of like got stuck into that music scene, and randomly, again, this was like 10 years ago, I one of my friends got it in her head that like I was a DJ or something like that, because I guess I was listening to a lot of this music, and I had never DJed in my life. But anyways, she was like, "Hey, like I want you to DJ my birthday party." I was like, I don't know how to DJ, but anyways, she was like very adamant about it. "Hey, I want you to DJ." I was like, "Okay, right." So I knew a friend who had like a pair of decks, and I took like a week to kind of learn the ropes on DJing, how to like mix tracks together, that sort of stuff. And so had like my first DJ gig, just doing everything kind of off the cuff, playing a lot of the music that I really liked. And I really enjoyed that experience. And then so from there, continued to DJ, and then eventually got into production. So kind of got into everything really on accident, but made the disco stuff for a while, and then slowly just progressed towards making minimal tech, deep tech, but also like that level of energy that you feel on labels like Nazo and La Para, that sort of stuff. So it's like, it's not quite leaning into that American style or that high energy tech house, but it also does have a lot of energy, kind of party music. But yeah, I mean, that's how things started, and that's kind of where I am right now.
Yeah, in your music there are a lot of sort of like musical samples in there. So how do you go about finding those sort of samples? Are they ones that you've known from like your past, or yeah, like basically how do you go about finding them and implementing them into your music?
Yeah, so it's funny, like a lot of what I originally got into music with, like new disco, and there's like a few different genres of, and some of them are kind of funny. There's a genre, it's called disco sleaze. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Have you ever heard that term?
No, no.
So it's exactly like it's kind of described. It's a very like early 80s, mid 80s corny, sleazy style of disco, like very kind of cheap synth sounds, and really just kind of very like obvious disco sounds. And so I had been into that type of music for a really long time. So I like built up this really big kind of database of that music. So what I've been doing a lot lately is, I'll build something that's a very minimal tech style track. And then I'll start to hunt through that library of like corny disco and new disco, and just find like little synth sounds or little sounds that I find interesting, and start to integrate them. And luckily it helps bring like a lot of musicality to this style of music, which is often, I'm sure you run into it too, like with your students. The biggest challenge that a lot of people face is like they can do the drums, they can do the percussion, they can do a groovy bass line, but then they have trouble when it comes to things like bringing like musicality or a bit of melody,
Yeah.
or like chords or whatever it is to the style of music. because like me, I'm not musically trained. I have no idea how to do that stuff. I just know what sounds cool. And, if it's in the same key as the bass line, then, it's going to fit. So yeah, get a lot of my music from just what I have in my database.
Yeah, that's sort of what triggered me to actually ask the question because, yeah, like yourself with your students, a lot of people like get the groove down and then they go, "Oh, what's your feedback on my track?" And it's
Yeah.
like it's always the same thing. It's always like, yeah, your groove's cool, like your drop's cool, but like
Yeah.
what makes your track stand out from another groove? It needs something where people go, "Oh, do you remember that track that had such and such in it?" Or yeah,
Yeah.
it needs
That
that,
weird vocal
yeah,
sample, that
weird synth or
cheesy
whatever.
synth stab or something like that. That was just super memorable. It's like kind of that special moment. Yeah, you bring it up. It's like a blessing and a curse right now within this music,
Yeah,
where you can hunt out like sample packs like mine, sample packs like yours,
yeah,
and you can really get the foundation for one of these tracks pretty quickly, right? I'm sure you're the same. It's like push yourself to get creative with this stuff. Don't just
yeah.
take top loop, toss it on, bass loop,
That's
toss
it.
it on.
Yeah,
I mean, you can do that if you want. I don't care.
yeah,
But anyways, once you send it to me and it's just that, I'm going to be like, is there a little bit more you can do here? And more importantly, less than me, myself, if you're going to be sending it to labels like Nazo and Lapera, a lot of these labels that are signing this type of music, they're going to look for that extra something. People can typically get a groove down pretty solid. It's somewhat easy these days.
yeah. Absolutely. Like, there's so much good music out there, and people are making like really good grooves. And but yeah, to have that sort of X factor with your track, you do need to give it that carrot that it needs to. I know it's a bit of a cheesy say, but sort of tell a story. It can't just be like a drum groove that just plays sort of the same way throughout, doesn't it? And I think, especially
Yeah.
with your music, like I mean, you've really nailed that. And I think in the sample pack, some of the that you've got just released, yeah, there's some of the sounds in that really like sort of bring that out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I tried to really do that. So if you want me to talk about the pack and then we can jump in.
yeah,
But
sure.
yeah, I tried to, as much as I don't want people copying exactly what I do, I tried to show how I bring kind of that flavor and that
Yeah,
style, like how I take an extra step or what's my unique approach to doing this. And with the pack, you're gonna get a lot of that familiarity when it comes to like the top loops, like very
yeah,
style
tiki taka.
percussion, that sort of stuff. And, bass lines that are short and focused on the groove, really focus on the low end. But also within the loops, I really tried to bring, like within the top loops, I really tried to bring like my call and response style, where this is a lot of what I see too with a lot of my students is their call and response styles tends to be close together, the elements.
Mm,
And so what this can actually end up creating sometimes is something that feels like very loopy and can get a little bit boring to the listener pretty quickly. So rather than having, your call here and then your response only, like a half a bar later or like a quarter of a bar later, I'm thinking in terms of, what's a call I can do in the first bar that responds to something in the third bar or the
yeah,
fourth bar. So
so
that way
important.
yeah, what were you gonna say?
No, so I was just saying it's so important. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, that way it lengthens the loop. It takes longer for that loop to actually repeat itself, which although we make very loopy, very repetitive style music, when you do those things, it's going to help extend and keep the listener's attention. So that way it just doesn't get repetitive in their brain. So doing that within the top loops, and then also, once we jump into it, this is really kind of like my special approach. I call it the atmosphere groove. So this is something that typically is going to supplement that top loop and that percussion groove. And again, it's going to bring in those elements of call and response, having things a little bit more extended, having the time between the call and between the response, having a good amount of time so it's not happening too often. But what I typically do with those atmosphere grooves is I try to look for like melodic sounds, stuff that's a little bit more sustained, not very percussive, but maybe like chord stabs or sounds that are sampled from other pieces of music or little pieces of a vocal, that sort of stuff. But that's one thing that I like to bring into a lot of my tracks. And honestly, now when I'm making music and I don't add the atmosphere groove, my tracks feel like empty without it. And so as soon as I get it, then I can like feel like it's something that is kind of completing the track. But I was talking to a student over the weekend too. It was, and I was showing him how I built them. And he was like, I just like it because it's another thing that your ear can latch onto, And sometimes you don't even notice it until like you're listening through half of these songs. Like, oh, what's that thing that's sitting in the background? Now I'm like, it's going with the percussion, but it's something different that I can listen to. So
yeah, it's the hard thing with making this type of music is making repetitive music, not sound repetitive. And
yeah,
these little
like
things,
oxymoron.
yeah, these
Yeah.
little things that come in. I don't even
Yeah.
think you realize it, but that's the key to making it less repetitive is having these little things that come in the background. They're just sitting there. They pop out here, pop out there. Then you add another little something that's calling up, that's responding to that over the four,
Yeah.
8 bars, and then eventually the main sort of 32 bars of your track becomes this like really fluid
Yeah.
track, which is it just flows and it's not so much like kick, loads of percussion and then
Yeah.
clap. And you're absolutely right about some people, they put so much percussion in between the kick and the clap that it's just
Mm-hmm.
like all this dead fast percussion, it's dead messy, and then the clap. So
Yeah.
just going over that, how did you sort of learn yourself to get that call and response over a longer period of time? Was it lessons or was it just literally just playing around and seeing what you thought sounded right?
Yeah, it's funny how like I felt like that was like the question you're going to ask, and I don't have the exact of when it happened, but I remember when I started to really try to make this music, I would listen to people like Tommy and Cash and
Yeah.
Iglesias, yourself, um, trying to think of like other like Diego Sosa and Diego Bustamante, like
Good stuff as
yeah,
well, like
good
Kesha.
stuff. Yeah, exactly. Like yeah, he was a definitely. I think the first two people that really got me into this specific were like Gustav and Tommy and Cash.
Yeah, I think I was the same to
Um,
be honest. Yeah.
but I remember when I first started listening to that. Yeah, your brain, you listen to it and you're like, oh, there's a ton of percussion. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into Ableton and I'm just gonna cram as much
Yeah.
stuff as I can in there.
Yeah.
And the first like 4 or 5 times you do that, it fails pretty miserably. Couple of reasons. Number one, you try to do too much, right? And then number two, you really don't have like an ear yet for what pieces of percussion are going to work well with other pieces of percussion. So you end up just creating like a lot of sloppy tracks,
Yeah.
right? It's just like too much. And it was funny too, like when I really first started to make this, that was the feedback I was getting was like,
Yeah.
I hear you going for that sound, but it's
Just not
absolute
there.
mess, you know? And so I think what it came down to and what was really helpful was when people like Thomas Biscara started releasing sample packs that gave you a really good insight into just what he's doing with his top loops and just what he's doing with his percussion, it allowed me to really kind of analyze and see like, oh, within that percussion loop, he's got his call at the beginning and the respond is not all the way to the end. So that just gave me my clues as to just like I need to start separating these things and giving them more space and giving them more time. And then what's funny though is now that I've been able to develop that, you develop that ear, you know it works together, and once you get more skilled at it, then you can start to cram a ton of stuff in there, but still make it work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just about creating a lot of frankly sloppy, crappy
Yeah.
tracks. And then also too, like copying people's tracks to the best of your ability, right? Not for the intention of like, oh, I'm going to release this song.
Yeah,
Typically, what
exactly.
happens though when you copy a track is like you copy it for the first 35-40% of it and then you go on your own way. But I always suggest like take somebody's track, really just copy it to your best of your ability, find claps that are similar, percussion that's similar, snares that are similar, hi-hats that are similar. And the purpose is just to train your ears, just to train what sounds work well together, what are the sounds other people are using. And that if you do a lot of that, you can progress really fast in percussion. Excuse me, in production, because
Yeah.
you train your ear super fast.
Yeah, I think this information is going to be invaluable. So I think from the sounds of it, the people that you've been teaching or been giving feedback
Mhm.
to are sort of suffering from the same issues that the people that not everyone, not
Yeah.
yeah, not pigeonhole everyone, but a lot of people that call me want to make sort of transition into that style or are just new to production. They are
Mhm.
hitting sort of the same issues as that. And I think when you break down tracks for them, they realize that there's certain like percussion sounds that you'd think are maybe even a vocal or they
Mhm.
sound like a musical element. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of people they go for like the opposite, like the rims, the claves, the
Mhm.
cowbells and stuff like that. But um, yeah, I think really trying to get them calm responses with different types of percussion sounds, even sounds that you
It
would
helps
never
the
think.
interest.
It helps the
Yeah.
interest so much.
Yeah.
And then along with that, sort of like I found a lot of time with the kick as well. I'm not too sure if you run into this issue, but
Yeah.
quite a lot of people using quite like a flat kick in that style
Yeah.
type of music, and it's like the track doesn't have like a bass in the first place to groove off. So
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I see a lot with kicks, I don't know if we'll have time to go into today. I just see it constantly. It's literally like besides what we're talking about previously, it's like the net. Well, so that's like an arrangement and production style type thing. This is more of a mixing thing.
yeah,
I see it constantly. Everybody always uses the word boxy, but that doesn't like speak to me in my brain. So I refer to it as like cloudy or
mm,
inflated. What
mm,
I see constantly, it's just because like the packs that we use, people they're not going to overly EQ the kick. They're going
mm,
to kind of leave it as its raw form, so that way it's like you can take it and you can carve it and push what you need to push and take out what you need to take out of the kick. But I see constantly, or I hear just way too much going on in 100 to 500 hertz,
mm,
right? And so what ends up, and that's typically tends to be in the kick. And so what happens is when you have a lot of frequencies in that range, specifically like 100 to 250 in the kick, and then you also have bass tones coming through that. What it does is, again, it creates what I perceive as like an inflated a very cloudy sounding track, right? So
mm.
it's like that whole area of the low end really takes over everything. And also too, you run into a lot of mastering issues that way too, because you have really overloaded frequencies. There's a lot of loudness in that range. So your track, because there's just so much in that range, the kick's really going to hit, the low end's really going to hit the limiter a lot sooner, which makes
Mm.
it difficult for mastering engineers to really kind of like push the loudness and push it hard into a limiter when there's just so much of that frequency. So yeah, I don't know if you're listening to this video and go take a look at your spectrum. If you
Yeah.
see that 100 to 500, if you see that level of it in your spectrum matching up to the sub of your kick, that means you got to carve it down, pull it down.
Yeah,
It creates so much clarity in the mix.
and literally you just need an EQ for that. Don't you?
Yeah,
You don't need any expensive plugins. It's just a very
just a little
simple.
carve. Yeah.
Just yeah, just have a look, take a look at yeah what's appearing on your EQ, and
Yeah.
then yeah,
I
as you
see it.
said,
It's funny, dude. It's like so many. And I think it's just probably you're beginner. You're either listening to a not so great pair of headphones, or you're probably listening if you're making stuff on monitors. It just like the kick sounds really powerful and
yeah,
strong, that sort of stuff. So you're like, oh, like I don't want to pull out. It's tough sometimes. You pull out a little bit of that like 100 to 150 or 100 to 200, and you feel like, oh man, a lot of that power in the kick is getting lost. But it may be so when you're listening to it and you're mixing things down, but ultimately a lot of that power is going to get made up in the mastering
mm,
stage, right? Because everything's going to be pushed, everything's going to be elevated, and you really want to push a clear mix, not a loud mix
yeah,
into a limiter.
yeah, especially with the
So
low end as well, because like you say, it can really take over, can't it?
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so what sort of releases have you got coming up? What are your goals for the next year or so? Yeah, where's Wait For Me heading?
Yeah, so right, I had a ton of releases to get the year rolling. So a bunch of stuff that rolled into summer. So that was really good. But it was also bad because I signed all my tracks and I had to go make a bunch more of them,
Mhm.
which is a it's a good problem to have. But I just signed, well, I've had a few that have been signed with Nazo. That's going to be coming out, I think, either at the end of this year or early next year, that have been getting some really good support from DJs like Joseph Capriati. So those, I'm really excited for that EP. I have a couple tracks coming out with them, but it won't be for a while. I just signed two with Black Seven. So
Yeah,
yeah.
they're very nice
I,
tracks as well.
do you know, I'll ask you right now, do you know when they might be coming out
Yeah, I
or?
think I wrote them down before. I think it's October time, October, November. Yeah. So
So for now, unless I do any self-releases, you just got to be happy with the music I put out now.
yeah,
I put out in the first couple of months. Yeah, release schedules they're long these days, man.
yeah, they are. And I think I know this for myself anyway. I'm trying to sort of really fine tune my sound, go for the bigger labels, get the big
Yeah,
DJs playing it, and just enjoying making my music. I used to feel like I don't know if you felt this as well, like put a lot of pressure on myself just to like
yeah,
release music. But yeah, I'm sort of stockpiling tracks a little bit now and just trying to look for the right place for them, and send them
yeah,
out to the right DJs and not just send them out to everyone.
yeah. No,
Um,
I'm on the same boat. It's my focus is always I try to ask myself this a lot when I'm making music is like, am I having fun? And if I'm
yeah.
like pushing myself or trying to fit into too much of a box, I'm typically not having fun.
Mm,
And then when when I'm in that flow state and I am having fun, I might be making tracks that are sounding a little bit different or really kind of out there in comparison to other stuff I've been making. But the most important thing to me is just to make stuff that's just gonna kind of naturally happen, even if it ends up moving into a little bit of a different genre.
mm.
I'm not really concerned about that. But yeah, I'm on the same page with bigger labels. You know, it's been good to get some support from some pretty big DJs over the past like year and few months. I have a few that I believe I just signed with Happy Techno. So I'm not sure when those will be released, but my focus right now is, and I learned this from Iglesias a long time ago, is you really want to have when you're really rolling with signing music, you typically really want to have at least like 10 demos, like always ready to go.
Mm.
So yeah, like, as soon as I signed all that stuff and had it all released at the beginning of the year, I think I only had like 2 or 3 demos left. So my focus was not really on support or signing things. It was like, I need to get from 3 demos back to 10, so I can have a good backlog, that
Yeah,
sort
I'm
of
on a
stuff.
similar wavelength to that, to be honest. I was on an A&R session on Trackstack last Wednesday, and
Yeah.
they asked me like, "Oh, what's the perfect amount of demos to submit?" And I said 3 to 5 for one
Yeah.
label.
I'll
One,
never submit 10.
yeah,
It's
yeah, of
just,
course, yeah. Those 10 are going to suit different labels, aren't they? But
yeah.
it's good for them to, if they do ask for more tracks, to have more tracks in your back catalog. And if you only have
Yeah.
five, like 4 or 5 tracks, and then you've got 3 with a label, then
Mhm.
you've only got two, and you've always just got to keep making tracks, just try and get that like sort of like those 10 tracks. And there might be
Yeah.
somewhere you've submitted them to a few labels that you like, they're not really taking it, it's not getting played, so that probably just be like, right, maybe it's just not good enough, and then make something else in the meantime.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I'm on the same wavelength as that. Really, it's good to have like a broad range of demos and promos to send out.
Yeah.
Should we get into sort of production tips and
Yeah. Yeah. I
um,
can do that.
yeah, like maybe go through. Yeah, I think people would love to see around the sort of musical side of things, and
Mhm.
also the top loop side of things as well.
Yeah.
If we go through that, I think that'll be
Yeah.
really helpful to the watchers. So just before we get into it, it's probably worth doing a shameless plug around your sample pack that's out now on CB Music.
Yeah. We'll hear a
It,
lot of the sounds today, and if you like them, go grab them.
Absolutely. I've been using the pack. It's a top pack. Obviously, I'm going to say
Thank
that
you.
it's on the website, but genuinely, it's a good pack. I've been using it in tracks lately. The link will be in the bio for it.
Here's the thing
Really
too. I'm
check it
using
out.
it.
Yeah, it's a top
I
pack.
spent all this time on it. I started working on a track like last week, and I was like, I
Yeah,
couldn't find something that like was working with it, and I was just like, wait, I just made this whole thing with all things that I know are things
yeah,
that I like. Let me
yeah,
dive into. And it was just like, oh man, that's perfect. That's perfect. Again, perfect for me. I don't know if it would be perfect for you, but I'm sure there's going to be some stuff in there that's helpful.
They will.
So
And that on the website, the slogan is level up your grooves, because that's what I'm trying, we're all trying to aim for, is to provide
yeah,
samples and information about how to get from just your drums to a full track that's grooving with lots of different elements in. And this
yeah,
pack typifies that. It's really good. Which
thanks.
we'll go through some bits now.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess we'll start in what we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is the atmosphere groove. And so in the pack, you see at the top, it says Atmos grooves. Typically, when you're getting like a pack from somebody else, you'll see something that's labeled like atmospheres. And what I found a lot of times in packs is those tend to be something that's going to like sit way in the
Hmm.
background of the mix, either during the breakdown or over like the whole track if you want
Yeah.
like a fuzz or a hiss or something like that. So these are not that, right? What these are again, I think I mentioned it before, these are supporting call and response style loops that really are going to support your tops, right? To add like an extra layer, an extra bit of groove, an extra bit of something for the listener to latch onto. And I typically, I have like no rhyme or reason about building these, except for finding or making interesting sounds to put into them. Um, and then when I'm typically thinking along the lines of like making these, though, is like I like to, hop into effects loops and take out pieces, or heavily modulated, heavily affected vocal loops and take pieces out of that. And you'll also see sometimes like there's key labels. I'll do this a lot too when I'm building my track and I have my percussion groove. I got my bass line that's in a certain key, and I have my kick going. What I'll do is I'll go find either like a song, or a loop that's going to be in that same key, and then match up that key to the bass line. So that way it kind of creates like this melodic bed for my track. Because again, like you're like me, Chris, like I can't write melodies. I suck at chords. I can't do all
Yeah,
that shit.
that's it.
But
Yeah.
I want my tracks to still feel musical, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a great way to kind of create a little bit more musicality, is like go find some stuff that's in the key of your bass line, or better yet, go to your iTunes, grab a track that's in that key of that bass
Yeah.
line, pull some pieces out of it, do some really heavy modulation, some really heavy sampling, and create like a call and response style groove with it. But just to listen to like a couple of these, and they're pretty low volume. I'll increase the sample volume over here. Can you hear that?
Yeah, yeah, it's coming through.
Yeah. So this one actually, it sounds like there's like a chord in it. So there might be like a bit of a key to this one, but it's built off of just random vocal samples. And you notice it's like it has a repetition to it. So again, it's really just something that's call and response that's going to help support your percussion.
Yeah, it also acts as sort of like the glue, doesn't it? It's gluing everything. It's gluing the groove together. It's that real thing that's in the background that you don't. You sort of like, what is that? What is that in the background? And it's
Yeah.
just nicely sitting there, and
Yeah.
yeah, really, really helps with just getting that fullness to the groove.
Yeah, and if too, like if we have time today, maybe I'll open up a project that I'm working on right now, as long as my CPU doesn't freak out. And uh, I can take a quick look at like, one that I built and kind of show you what the track sounds like with and without it, because it's usually like when you shut it off after having it on the track, it's almost like the track feels like empty.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, this one built off of like vocal. I guess this one was in C minor. Oh, the little art
yeah.
sound there, that was in C minor. And then this one, yeah, this one's built off of chords, so it was all in E minor.
And again, what you were saying about Thomas Bisquiera's packs for yourself in terms of
Mm-hmm.
being able to break down sort of what he was doing
Mm-hmm.
with the drums, I think this is good to show people what those sounds are that maybe they're not, they can hear them in the track when they're listening to your
Yeah,
music, but they're not actually sure what they are. Well, this is what is
Exactly.
giving your fullness and giving it that wait for me style with sort of not just a groove, it's got this melodic element to it.
Yeah. Yeah, these are my building blocks. Like
Yeah.
everything you see right here, obviously there's more things that go into my tracks, but it's just like you can, if you took all this and just put them into a loop, you'd have a very wait for me sounding
Yeah.
track, you know?
Do you
So
want to
those are the
hop?
atmosphere. Yeah,
Do you
what
want
you
to hop?
said?
Do you want to hop in and into a project then maybe whilst we're
Yeah.
on the
Yeah,
Atmos
let me
grooves
just talk a little
and
bit. I'll go through these a lot quicker and then
yeah,
I'll hop into a project so I can
yeah,
show
sure.
everybody. But like my bass loops, I'll show you how I build bass in a second by opening up a project. I don't use MIDI. I use loops, but I chop loops up, right? And I try to chop loops from many different sample packs because what it helps doing is it creates really like interesting tones.
Mm.
So like you'll have one sample note that comes from one synthesizer and then another that comes from another synthesizer. And because you're like constantly changing tones and frequencies, I find that just brings like a lot of interest to my bass lines. So I'm
That's
pretty
interesting.
what's that?
Yeah, that's interesting. So, when you say you don't use MIDI, is that ever use MIDI or just the majority of the time? Because it's another thing when it comes to like producing music is there's no right or wrong way to do it. Like you like a lot of people think, oh, using loops, but you're using them in like a really creative way, and you're getting really experimental with them. And then again, that's giving your music your own sound. That's where it's going to come from, is because you're doing something in a really unique way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a really like important and valuable bit of information for people to take on board. Sure.
Sometimes I'll use MIDI. I would say 90% I'm not, but
Yeah.
sometimes I'll use
Delicate.
MIDI. And what'll end up happening too is if I build a bass line off of MIDI, I'll just bounce it to audio and I'll
Yeah.
start pulling pieces out of it. But yeah, just listen to a couple of them. So you can notice like things change tone as you go through because I'm taking notes and one shots and two little note things from different loops. That one's pretty similar. Probably I took a loop and just rearranged things. Yeah, this one probably came from a bunch of different ones.
Yeah.
But you can also notice too, like everything's really low.
Yeah.
I really keep my bass lines low because it's about that low end groove. Yeah, it has a little bit of tone that can kind of pokes through at like 250, but when you have all the other elements above it, your percussion, your vocals, your atmosphere groove, you need to make sure that that bass is kind of really sitting in one spot.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
what I go through a lot of the time. I do say to people, they go, I'm struggling to write a bass line, and my advice, I don't know if you agree with this, but my advice is always, if you can't write a bass line, there's probably something that isn't correct in your groove. There's probably
yeah,
something wrong with the drums, or you probably haven't got a call and response. Because if you've got that call and response, and you have that groove to the drums
just
or
got to
to
fit
the
it in.
track, you'll just fit it
Yeah,
in.
yeah,
The groove will tell you what the bass line needs to do.
yeah,
With this type of music. Obviously, there's other types of sort of like tech house music where the bass line is like the main thing in the track, isn't it? It's playing off another lead, and that there, like, the drums are like 4 or 5 channels. But with this type of
yeah,
music, when so much of the track is about the drums and then the musical side of it and then the effects and they're all really giving like core and response, and the bass line, like you say, it's that foundation, isn't it? It's just once you've got all that in, it's then just right, what needs to support this to keep it grooving, and that's when the
yeah.
bass line comes into play.
So a couple of things with that is like sometimes you're just early, like in your production. Like when as soon as I finish my percussion groove, I can start to hear like
The
what the
bass,
bass line
yeah,
should be, you know, and then I'll go hunting for a starting point to get that going. Um, and then yeah, like and then number two, like you said, it's just like if you can't really hear where a bass line is going to fit in, that means that the percussion groove hasn't created that space
yeah,
or those kind of hints as to where the bass line should go. Which also brings me to another thing is like I'm sure you start with your percussion, then you get your kick, and then you do your bass line, or how do you do it?
so I go kick, and then usually my
Yeah,
it's like I'll get a quick sort of like maybe put a top loop in, then start to add some percussion in.
Yeah.
Then I'm sort of getting the idea of what the vibe of the track's going to be. Then I'll sort of add a bass line in just to like, can I get like an idea of what I want this track to end up like? Then I'll probably add some
Mhm.
more percussion in and start build it out that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't ever start writing the bass line until I've
Yeah.
got
It's
an idea.
much harder. I think that's for
So much
everybody
fun.
too. It's
Yeah,
much harder to write the bass line first than the percussion.
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
personally.
Effects, you're gonna find some very kind of like typical effects in here. Hats, I just view kind of put a kind of like very categorical,
Nice
very
and
like simple
snappy.
hats that I'll put in
Yeah.
here. My percussion loops, if you jump into here, you'll notice like it's loops with a whole bunch of different stuff going on. So what I tried to do with my percussion loops here was take my percussion that I put into my top loops and just give you kind of that call and response type of vibe that I'm getting from my percussion. So you'll notice as you go through these, there tends to not be any percussion loops that are like just bongos or just congas or just clave or rim shots or something like that. It's going
Yeah.
to be a whole mixture of stuff. This is
Yeah.
just like a kind of a funky sound, snare.
Yeah, you can really like this groove really nice.
Yeah, just all random stuff. But again, it's just like I'm taking kind of my percussion elements, putting in there snares and claps. I think I just put in a couple um, like little shots in there,
Yeah.
and also like these style of snares, which is like that
Yeah.
80s gated snare. Like I
They,
love that sound right now.
yeah.
It adds a ton of impact, and not everybody's doing it. There are a few people doing it, but not like everybody. So it can help your track sound a little bit more characteristic and
Yeah.
interesting.
I think people like a Glazes and R Squared, they've made
That's
that sort of
exactly where I got it.
yeah, they've made that style
I love it.
a little bit
Yeah.
more popular, haven't they? And yeah,
Yeah.
again, a lot of people are trying to make tracks like them, then they've got a really specific sound, haven't they? And it's yeah, it's really nice. Really good.
Yep. Synth loops, I really don't use MIDI, so a lot of these are samples that have chopped and
Yeah.
rearranged and made all sorts of stuff. But
Yeah.
as you notice, as you go through it, again, it's like everything is call and response, call and response, call and response.
Yeah. You got yeah.
So it's like always thinking along those themes. And two, one thing I get a lot of with my students is they try to bring in musical elements and then they'll say, okay, now my track sounds just more like kind of like classic house
Mm.
or some sort of style that's very like not minimal tech. And they'll be like, how do I still integrate this stuff without moving towards another genre? And what I always say is like, you got to focus on your call and response.
Mm.
If you have like a lead line or a synth line that just kind of continuously, progressively goes throughout the groove or throughout, the phrases of your track, it's going to make it sound like something different. So think about taking those elements, making them a little bit more sporadic, right? A
Mm.
little bit more like singular, and one happens here, another happens here, another happens here. When you do that, you focus on the call and response, you can still stay in that minimal tech kind of world.
Yeah. I think that's another
Yeah.
nugget of information as well is around that it's a lot of chopped up samples and stuff. I know this is what I thought anyway when I was sort of trying to make this music before I like delved a lot like deeper into it is you're trying to I wonder what synth they're using, and obviously there's nothing wrong with using synths, like
Yeah.
that's using synths writing music is great, but you can also make the most out of samples. Like,
Oh,
and
dude.
it's like you were saying before, like just get creative, like go to
Yeah.
a random 80s track
Yeah.
and just take a tiny snippet out of it, put some effects on it, and then make this call and response. And like, you might have it's the same with the vocals, isn't it? It's, get like two, three, four, five, and just get dead creative with them. You don't need to, know synths inside out to be able to make really
It
cool,
helps
melodic
sometimes.
elements. Of course, yeah, it helps.
Yeah. It
It
helps if
helps.
you're trying to create like some sort of in your breakdown where like
Yeah.
the pad or the string or whatever is really
Yeah.
evolving. So it helps to know, what attack, decay, sustain, release are going to
Yeah.
do, and opening up the filter, all those things is like it's really helpful. But dude, yeah, like I'm again like 90% audio. I love to
Yeah.
just take samples, and
Cut them up.
it's fun and it can be creative work to go into a synthesizer, find a cool preset, tweak
Yeah.
with it, make your own stuff. But it can also be like really, it can be challenging sometimes. And I'm always on like getting stuff done as quickly as possible. That's how I stay like inspired. So yeah, just love to listen to samples, take little pieces, that sort of stuff. But here's just like a string. What do we got here? Yeah, just like some simple chord sounds. Again, like Rhodes piano, but this is
Yeah.
really focused again on like call and response. Bam, and then wait.
Um,
Yeah. So again, taking that sort of stuff and always thinking like call and response. And then my tops, that's where there's going to be like the most. And so when we jump into a project, I'll show you how I typically build my top loops. I always build my top loops off of other top loops. I mean,
yeah.
hopefully nobody's gonna get mad at me, or hopefully nobody's
Yeah.
gonna call it cheating, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
I always find what I call a kicking off point.
Yeah. I'm
You know,
saying.
it's just something where like I like the swing of it, I like the clap, I like the hats, whatever it is in the top loop. I want something that's going to kind of get me going, right? Be
Mhm.
the catalyst for me to set off. So, you know, and sometimes I'll, you know, have that first element and I'll do a lot of work to really hide it and put stuff on top of
Yeah.
it and to the side and all that sort of. But then sometimes it really works well. And so, you know, I'll reel it back a little bit with just some different production techniques to make it, you know, more staccato, or you know, like pull back reverb, or you know, switch things up in it. um but then there's sometimes where like it really just works and I just want to add more to it,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, like sometimes you might be going through these top loops and be like, oh, that sounds kind of familiar. It's probably because I've taken like a piece from something else and just built on top of it.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah, to listen to it. Yeah, go ahead. What's
yeah,
that?
so I was about to say, like, I'm exactly the same. Like, a lot of the time I go through, top loops, and just that's where like the original inspiration, and sometimes that top loop, the first one, the one I start with in the beginning, I actually end up taking out at some point because I've built
Yeah.
so much around it. But
Hmm.
it's that initial inspiration, and like you say, with the swing, I think we've spoken before outside this call around sort of I find it I don't even know if it's possible to make that specific sound
Hmm.
using just MIDI.
Mm.
I think you could spend so long trying to make it sound in the same style with the same swing as the
Yeah.
way it does when you sort of layer
Well, I
loops and
think
add percussion in.
what you'll end up doing is like you'll make a groove with one MIDI rack, and then you'll probably have to make another MIDI rack to layer on top of it, and another, right? And so at that point, it's just like, why not just take three, three top loops that are in a similar style, find out how they work together, and then layer those, right?
Yeah,
And then you've
exactly.
created your own unique thing. Although there's going to be sounds in there that, you know, other producers are going to pick up on it and be like, oh, well, you know, I've heard that. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's just, you know,
You have
hopefully I'm not disappointing anybody, but it's like I use top loops.
yeah, yeah. That's the thing. It's like a bit of a sin, like using it. Like, look, a lot of people use top loops, and
Yeah,
yeah, I think if all you've got in your track is
is the top loop.
three top loops
Yeah,
out of someone's sample pack, their
yeah,
bass line, their kick,
yeah.
and effects, and then
It'll
a
sound
vocal,
fine,
it'll
but it
sound
won't be.
okay, but that's not gonna make you a better producer.
Yeah,
And I think that's the key, isn't it? Is around when you're making music, you want to be able to try and like push yourself to like
yeah,
create new stuff and learn new ways of making music. Because if all you're doing is just stacking loops from the same pack, you're
hmm,
basically relying on whoever's pack you're using to make your
yeah,
music,
yeah,
essentially. So I think it's important that, yeah, of course, use two or three top loops, four or
yeah,
five, as many as it sounds like
yeah.
clean
Don't go
in the mix.
crazy.
Don't go too mad, obviously. But all the other stuff that we spoke about before, the musical side of things, the sampling, the percussion, the effects, the vocal chops, the Atmos grooves that you
Yeah,
use, all this stuff is gonna make you not even realize that, oh, he's using such and such top loop. It's
yeah,
just to get that initial bass to the track, get that initial swing and groove going, and then that's what we're going to build off.
Yeah,
So
it's always my kicking off point, and I'll
yeah,
like the swing, so then I'll match everything up to the swing. By the way, this is just like a little thing, but it's tedious, but I never use like the groove pool to match it up. I go to audio and I just push wherever the sound is. So it's annoying, but I've just found that the groove pool, when you like extract the groove from a top loop or any other loop or something like that, and then try to match that groove onto other loops, it gets a little wonky on certain things. So I always just like match it up according to like how the transients look. It's
yeah,
tedious, but it ends up working. But yeah,
yeah.
so
So
like a couple of the top loops just to listen to them, and that really like tiki taka style sound, good kind of body behind them. This one has a little bit of that like snare, that kind of like fat snare, but then also a nice snare fill to kind of push the loop along. One thing you'll notice too is my top loops tend to be a little bit long.
yeah,
That's because they have slight pieces of evolvement over the whole thing. So like I'll do things like I'll tune the snare a little bit higher on like the last snare of the loop, or I'll raise the volume up and down on certain elements as it goes through the whole thing to again add just a little bit of that randomness and variation. So that way it doesn't sound perfectly loopy. It sounds loopy in the sense that you're continuing to hear kind of the same elements, but not loopy in the sense that everything's perfect and the exact same
yeah.
volume and the exact same sound every time. Um, this one has like a little bit more low end. This one's like really skippy. This one has that snare. So if you're looking for that snare, I don't know, it just adds like a
Yeah,
whole new vibe. The only thing is you
yeah,
gotta be careful with it too. Like it's always good to, I find, to like layer a clap nicely with it. Because if you just have a snare, it's almost like it feels like it slows the track down. It's weird.
I know what you
I think
mean.
it's because claps have a lot of energy, very bright.
Yeah,
So, if you're gonna have that type of like nice, really solid fat snare, maybe have a little bit of that kind of clap tone on top of it, or working with it just to really help kind of create and keep that energy. It's like so much house music is built with kick, hat, clap, right? People are kind of used to that level of energy
yeah,
that comes from the strong beat. So yeah. And then vocal loops, again, call and response style stuff. Just like random samples, chopping things up. A few things are in key, a few things don't have any key or anything like that, so they're not. But again, this is so it's like take that stuff in, take it, put it into your track, and see how you can move things around to create that call and response. But yeah, that's the pack as a whole. So do you want me to jump into like a project and kind of show what it looks like when
yeah, yeah.
when
Let's
I get
have
things
a quick
built?
look at one of your projects.
Yeah.
Just again, that pack is available now on CB Music. The link will be in the bio. So go
Yeah.
check it out because yeah, it's gonna help you a lot to achieve better
Yeah,
grooves.
enjoy and
Whether
send me whatever you
yeah,
make. I want to hear
yeah,
it.
send it. I'll put the Instagram handles in the bio as well. So
Yeah,
send us any tracks that you make the pack.
I can do it. So this is a track I just started last night. So, still have to work out the full arrangement, but with me, I always start with, what's the first breakdown, going into the first phrase, into the second phrase, and then into the second breakdown. I know if I can get that chunk of the track working and sounding good, then everything else is just like, how do I basically lead into it? So
Yeah.
it's always like, I don't know if that's how you produce, but it's always like middle out, is how I approach things.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's the main part of your track, really. Like DJ, the first 32 bars, DJ's going to be mixing into it. Then it gets into it. Then it's your break. Then it's your first drop. Then it's the
Yeah.
main part of the track where this is what your track is this middle part. Then it's the
Yeah.
breakdown. Obviously, it's a lot of what's in the middle section, plus all your effects and things to build that tension. And then it's the second drop, which is like the main drop of your track a lot of the
Yeah.
time.
Most energy.
And then
Yeah.
it's sort of like and you're sort of going towards the outro then, aren't you? So yeah, the middle section of the track is what I tend to focus the most on to begin with.
Yeah. So let me just play it a little bit, and then I'll like quickly break down some stuff. We'll take a look at the atmosphere groove, take a look at my drums, also my bass line. I have 4 different audio files for it. So I'll show you what that means in a second. But let's play it. Again, still some elements that probably need to be added to this, but it's working, Very kind of like Stussy style track, or not Stussy, Josh Butler style track.
Yeah.
Ended up making it. Cool.
Really
So
nice.
thanks. So yeah, just like starting with the kick, just to mention what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I know we're talking more about like arrangement, building the track, but you notice I have this EQ on here. So I use these kicks a lot from these guys, the Freemasons. They had like a free pack on their website. I got it like years ago. It's called F9 Kicks. And it's some kicks that they've taken from a lot of house tracks. And they're like hyper processed, really fat, really big, a bit commercial sounding. But I like to use them because basically I can start with a kick that kind of covers the full spectrum, and then I can carve out the pieces that I don't really like. So like if you listen to this kick by itself, it's got everything, right? You can also see it on the spectrum here too. But what I'll do is, I'll take out area over here, I'll take out some here and take out some here to get rid of the click, get rid of kind of like that impact pop, and then bring out a little bit of that boxiness to make something that's a little bit more minimal tech sounding, a little bit more deeper. But I just like to have something that it's like full spectrum so that I can carve out of it. And then for the drums, so this one started with this specific top loop. And then from there, going to be adding like a little bit more kind of character and like, I think a little bit more impact with like a main hat. Right. And then as we start to go down here, we're going to see like the different like column start to come in. So like I have this, which I think is maybe like a snare or percussion element. Oh, so actually, I think it's a little vocal sound. Something interesting, something that I stretched out. And then I like to do like on the start, a lot of my loops is just have like a clap or some sort of like very quiet crash style sound. Just kind of intro the loop. And then like I'll have it like fade in and fade out, fade in and fade out. That way it helps like the transition of the loop. And then as we get down here, this is where you're going to see a lot of like the call and response stuff start to come into play. So if I add all this stuff, start to hear it. So when you're listening to this, I think the thing to pay attention is there's a ton going on, but I'm really only focusing on like certain things are responding to other things. And again, it's like I don't have it all bunched up so that it's all happening kind of at the same time, but rather, you'll have something that happens over here and then it gets responded to over here. Like looking at this is probably a call to this down here. And so on. So again, just not having things like too bunched up also too, having things on different rhythms. You know, there's certain things that are hitting on the 16ths, certain things that are hitting on the 4th, on the 8th, right? A lot of those snares, you're going to kind of come in and be like just off the strong beat. And then down here, I think I just had another hat. And then right here is going to be my 3. Like typically, so this project's still really early. I like to kind of group all the audio and make everything nice and clean and label it all, but I haven't gotten a chance to do that. But here's my claps down here. So these are 3 claps and snares. So these are 3 that I layered together. You know, one I pushed a little bit left, one a little bit right, another one a little bit left. Kind of a breakbeat style snare. And then down here, it's just some more additional elements. These are more kind of like fill elements. You see that they're very like sporadic. Again, just to lengthen that loop, create that variation, make sure that it's not doing the exact same thing constantly. Let me just solo all this so you can hear it all.
Yeah, there's something happening all the time.
The thing is, again, like maybe I'm explaining this wrong too, because I'm not musically trained, but when you listen to it, not everything's happening. I hear that a lot too with people's tracks. Not like they have everything happen on like a 16th, right? Which is pretty much like the fast, like as fast as you want to go with percussion. So as you listen to like elements come in, they come in on the 4th and on the half beat and other things like that, not all just on the 16th. Yeah. So and I keep everything together. I keep all my drums together. I process them pretty much all together. I always use audio. But then from there, after I build those, I'm building my bass loops, which it looks like I just use R-Squared's, a lot of their bass loops to come up with stuff. But this was taken from a whole bunch of different of their loops to just create something new. And so I just like to, you know, like each track here is going to have like 1 or 2 notes or something like that. Again, it's a really unconventional kind of weird way to build bass lines, but it's what works for me. And again, all these loops are kind of different. So you're going to have different tones, different synthesizers that made these bass sounds. So you're going to get a lot of like variation. And then at the end, you can really kind of like glue them together with like a limiter. This one, I don't typically do this, but I put an OTT on it at 50%. I think I just wanted to make the bass like kind of like really like aggressive and just chunky sounding. But what I like about this too, though, is it gives you control over each of like the volume of these notes, right? So each of these tracks, you can up and down, push them in volume, subtract them in volume. But ultimately it makes this style of bass line. And so like this tone right here, completely different from the rest of the track. And it adds just a little bit of that variation. Yeah, and so then with the percussion, you'll see how it works together. Yeah. But then on top of that, here comes my atmosphere groove, which again, is always going to be kind of like in the back of the mix. What I did was I went and found a track that was in the same key. It's like a funk track. And I just took a bunch of sampled elements from it.
The magic.
And so then if we play the track, and let me shut off the music too. So if I take away the atmosphere groove, it's like
there it is.
But I mean, it's still like got some good elements, but
yeah, it's still good.
I'm like, that sucks. Yeah,
it's still the groove is still sick. It doesn't take anything away from the groove, but it's not
flavor.
It's not got the flavor. It's not got the X factor. It's a groove that, you know, with a bit of practice, anyone could make. But what you've done with, not anyone, but most people, with the Atmos groove and that, yeah, that X factor, and it's playing with the bass line, you're getting
Mhm.
all these different groups that are all call and responding to each other. And then when you put them together, the groups themselves are then call and responding to each other. And then this is when you get like the never ending groove. It's like constantly grooving, it's constantly call and
Yeah,
responding. And that is like, yeah, the X factor to making, say, like
just
taking your music
something
to the next
different,
level. Yeah, that is.
something added, and so, and then the only other thing is just like little vocal things, but also like I think I stumbled upon some like really nice sounding samples for my synths.
Yeah,
But I like to have a lot too. When the drop hits, I like to have like a nice stab,
yeah,
like an interesting sound. So I found this. It's like old school kind of like boom bap style sound. And then it's just a lot of little like kind of chord shots. And then also, I had these guitars in the breakdown. So taking little pieces of that and bringing it in as like turnarounds and transitional elements,
I think that's another
right?
thing that people struggle with, isn't it? Is that they have a musical element they like in the breakdown, but then how do you tie that into the wider track?
Yeah,
How do you not make it sound like completely out of place in the breakdown? And I think what you've
yeah.
done here by cutting little parts of it up and then using it as a fill, it then makes you think, oh, actually, this is still like a cohesive track, and it still feels like it's all meant to be together.
Yeah, introducing new stuff, you can be pretty safe in breakdowns and then also like turnarounds.
Yeah,
Because turnarounds, it's like you want to do something different. You want to go away from the main idea and then come back to the main idea.
yeah,
And then other than that, too, like the chords, they sound good in here. These two guys right here. But as I go along in this track, I'm probably going to want to take a lot of these sounds and hint them in the breakdown. So that way they don't completely come out of random.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that's the musical stuff. And again, it's in the same, I think it's pitched to everything's in A minor in here. The track that I sampled for the Atmos Groove was in A minor. And then all these pieces are pitched to A minor. So everything fits nicely together. But yeah. So, and then, vocal stuff. There's just a lot of chops, random stuff, and, finding little elements just to integrate and pop in there and those sort of things. But, that's really kind of the main stuff behind like building my track, getting a really solid percussion groove, finding a kick that works with it, building my bass line, and then, adding that flavor with the atmosphere groove. And what I
Yeah.
find too is with the atmosphere groove, it helps me make good musical decisions too. Like before I had the atmosphere groove, I was trying to find synth sounds that worked in this track, and I couldn't find anything. But as soon as I laid down the atmosphere groove and had a little bit of like melodic bed, then I was like, oh, like that sound will work there, and that sound will work there. It's almost like it helps you along the way. So yeah.
No, I think that's been really helpful. What we'll do is, if you've got any additional questions, then drop them down in the comments, and I'm sure you can
Yeah.
keep an eye on the comment section. Just drop people a reply if they've got any sort of additional questions, or they can drop you a DM on Instagram. Like I said before, I'll leave that link in the bio.
Yeah, so also too, like, yeah, like Chris, I teach production, do one-on-one sessions. But if you ever want track feedback, I don't charge for that. Just send me the track and I'll, leave you a couple comments on SoundCloud. And if you want some notes on the mix down or the arrangement, happy to help. So yeah, just connect with me and we'll see what we can do.
But that's been really That's been really good. Thank you, mate, for jumping on and showing
Yeah,
everyone that.
yeah,
Wicked.
thanks.